In this video I want to look at how you can add a frame of film as a border around your image. We'll look at using a scan of an actual piece of film, like here we've got a scan of a 35mm piece of film, and we'll also look at creating your own flexible medium format style film border which can adapt to images with different aspect ratios and different sizes. So we'll start off looking at the film scan. So I've got here a film scan which I've downloaded from Graham Richardson on Flickr. It's licensed with Creative Commons, and I'll put a link to that in the description. So I've got the film frame loaded into Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is resize it to the output size of the image that I want. This is going to image, then image size, and I want my final image to be 1080 pixels wide. So that's that resized. It's going to hit Control and 0 on the keyboard to bring it up to fit the screen. And then now I'm going to grab my image that I want to have the film border frame around it. Let's get my image. I'm going to drag it down so it's in a separate window. And then over here in the layer palette, I'm going to click on the layer and hold down the Shift key on the keyboard. And I'm clicking and dragging it, and then I'm going to let go of it over the image with the film frame in it. And that places the image in there. I'll just pop that back up there because we'll come back to that again later. Now I'm hitting Control and T on the keyboard. It would be Command T on a Mac, and that lets us transform the image so we can change the size of it. Clicking on the corner, holding down the Shift and Alt keys, or that would be Shift and Option keys on a Mac, and I'm just resizing it, just hitting the up and down buttons on the keyboard there. There we go, and now we've got it so it's over the middle of our thing, and we can change the blending mode here to multiply and press enter to accept our transformation. And now you can see we've got image with the film frame as a border around it. Another thing you might want to do is create a new layer above the film border. And I'm just using the marquee selection tool to draw over the text that's on the film frame. And I've got my default colours, that's D on the keyboard, black and white. And as black is my foreground colour, I'm going to hit Alt and backspace on the keyboard, and that fills that area with black. Now I'm going to deselect, Control and D, or Command D on the Mac. I'm going to use the text tool up here. Going to select a font. I think I might just go for standard Arial. And in my character settings I've got it set to all caps. And up here I better change the colour of my text. That still looks a bit too big, so let's make it a bit smaller still. And that's just a way of sort of adding your own branding to the film border to use. Instead of putting a watermark over your image, you can add your own text in here. If you really wanted to get it looking more realistic, you could try copying the pattern from here and using that to fill your text, but That's a bit much to go in for this tutorial, but that's how you can use a scan of a 35mm or any other film frame. But given that I'm using an image that's the same aspect ratio as a 35mm frame of film, then it makes sense to use a 35mm frame of film as the border. So next we'll go on to making a flexible size frame. What I want to show you is, let's say that this image had a different aspect ratio and it was square like this. Now what we're going to do with our film here, because the problem is that it's a different size, well, we could transform it. I just have to double click on it there to change it into a layer, to try and get it to fit our image. As you can see, that squashes it. So when you're using a scan, basically you're stuck with the same aspect ratio as the scan is in. You can't fit it to images that are a different size to the frame of the film. So if you're using a 35mm film scan to add as a border, then it won't work if you're trying to add it to a square image. If you're using a scan of a square format film, then it won't work if you're trying to add it to a standard 2:3 aspect ratio image. But what we can do instead is create our own custom film border, which is more flexible. That's what I'll go into now. So I'm going to get rid of that. So to create our fake film style border, I'm going to open an image. So I've already got one open here. It's best to start with an image that's in the same aspect ratio and same size as the images that you'll probably want to add the border to most, because that means that you don't have to resize it for every image, and you only have to resize the border when you're using images in an unusual aspect ratio. So to start off with, we're going to create a new shape layer. Oops, not over there, it's over here. So we've got a square shape from here, rectangle tool. Fill is black, there's no stroke, and I'm going to click and drag over the image. Now I'm going to switch to the pen tool. Over here in the paths, going to make sure I've got this selected, which is the path for the shape layer. Going to ensure this is on exclude overlapping shapes. And now I'm going to start drawing our top border. So I'm just clicking and dragging. When you click, it adds the points, and when you drag, it pulls out the handles, which adjust how the line goes from one point to the next. And you don't want it completely straight, because that will look too artificial. Now I'm at the corner, I'm going to start dragging the point down the other way to go down the right hand edge. Now you can see here we've got a bit of overlap, so just I'm alt clicking on this handle, or option click on the Mac, and click and drag it, and that lets you adjust the handle. I'm going to carry on down this edge. I adjust this point slightly. To adjust the points, you hold down Control or Command on the Mac, and then you can click and drag the point to change it. I'm just clicking and dragging a bit more. And then click and drag for the corner point, and Again, I'm alt clicking on this corner point, alt clicking on this handle, sorry, and alt clicking on that handle and just adjusting them to get sort of a triangle shape in the corner there. And clicking and dragging along the edge. I'm going to start going up this edge. I'm just going to adjust that point. Oops. And adjust the handles here. I can drag. Oops. Done an extra point on the end there. Oops. There we go. Control and Z there. Then just going to adjust these handles again. Just control clicking on a point shows you the handles for that point, so just control click on that, or be command click on a Mac, and then alt click on the handle to adjust it. And there we've got our path laid out. And next thing we might want to do is add some text. Oops. Just going to make that a bit bigger. That into our border, and that's the basics of our fake medium format film border. I think I might actually adjust the path a bit more for this corner here. So it's going back to the pen tool, got the path selected in the layer palette. There you go, that's a bit better. And that's given a film style border to this image. Now what we can do is we can get rid of our background layer, and then we can save this as a template. And so whenever we want to add a film border to our image, we can open up our template. And let's just use this one as an example. So to add the film border template to your image, you can just pull it down so it's in a separate window to the main image that you want to add it to. In the layer palette, select both your text layer and your border layer, and then again holding down the shift key, click and drag them across to your image, and then that adds them in over your image. Let's just pull up the border there. Do the same thing, click and drag them across. Now you can see that they're in the wrong orientation because this is a portrait orientation and we made the frame as landscape orientation. All we need to do is go to, in the layer palette I've got the text layer and the border layer selected. So go to Edit, Transform, Rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise, and then you can see that has added the border around our image, and it's the right shape. Let's get rid of that one. I think we can get rid of that one, and let's go to this one. Now this image is a lot larger in pixel dimensions than those other ones. So let's see what happens when we add the frame to this image. As you can see, it's a lot smaller, but we can resize it up very easily. Just hold down the control key or command key on the keyboard and press T for free transform, and then click. Hold down the Shift and Alt buttons on the keyboard, or Shift and Alt Option buttons on a Mac, and then you can click and drag out the border to cover the image. And if you were using a pixel based frame, this is what it would look like. As you can see, it's very pixelated along the edges, and the text you can't read at all. But because we're using a shape-based layer and text-based layer, when we accept the transformation, it resizes them without any loss of quality at all. So it's very easy to resize these to larger images. The other thing we can do is, let's get rid of those again. Let's say, what if this image was a square crop? Let's drag our border over there. Let's resize it. Now if we use free transform to resize this border, it will become stretched just as the scan would. But what we can do is, because we created this using a path, we can transform it in separate parts. So over here, I'm going to select the direct selection tool. I'm going to select the top half of the image. I'm going to click on one of the points, start moving it up, hold down the Shift key after you've started moving it, and then when you've got it to the top of the image, you can let go. Now I'm going to select the bottom half of the image. Again, click, start moving it down, hold down the Shift key to constrain it, let go, and then press Enter to accept the transformation. And then the last thing to do is just move our text layer back up to the top, again holding down the Shift key to make sure it stays in the same plane of movement. And now you can see we've got our border resized to fit the image, and it hasn't become stretched at the top and bottom. If I go on the history, if I go back to here, so you can see that's what it's like when we resize it by dragging the anchor points. If we resize it, without, you can see the tops and the bottoms of the frame become stretched. So it's a lot better to use the direct selection tool and adjust the path part at a time. And of course you can use this with panoramic images or whatever. So it's a nice way of creating a flexible frame, film style frame, that you can adjust to images of any aspect ratio. So to add, sort of make the border a little bit less clean, what we're going to do is add some noise to the edge of it. And the easiest way to do this is if we create a layer that's white. Let's get rid of that. merge those two together. So they've now turned into a raster object, so this isn't suitable for resizing now, so you need to make sure you do your resizing before you add any noise. I'm going to go up to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, go over to the Effects tab, and the grain. Use a lot of grain, large size, high roughness, and you can see at the edge it's kind of breaking apart a little bit now. Put OK on that. And then if we just change this to multiply blend mode, and now you can see the edge is not quite as smooth as it was before, and it's sort of a bit rougher and more authentic looking. The actual image itself we might want to apply some noise to as well to get that looking a bit more film-like. Again, going over to the Effects tab, and then the grain. For the image we'll probably want a bit less noise, maybe something like that. Let's OK that. And now we've got a more authentic looking film frame with sort of slightly rough edges and a bit of noise added to, a bit of film grain added to our image, like we would have if it was actually shot on film. If you're on an older version of Photoshop, you might not have the Camera Raw filter available, but you can still add noise to the border in a slightly different way. I'm going to start off by resizing the image. This is easier when you've got it at the correct output size. Just going to hit Control and 0 to fill the screen with that again. So if we create a new image, sorry, not a new image, a new layer, fill it with white, we'll hide the text layer, go to Filter, Noise, add noise, and you want a high percentage, and you want it to be Gaussian distribution and monochromatic. And now I'm going to control click on our border layer. There'll be command click if you're on a Mac, and that makes a selection based on the contents of that layer. And I've got white as my background layer, and with the noise layer selected, I'm going to hit Control and backspace. Oh, actually not yet. I'm getting ahead of myself there. Before I do that, what we need to do is feather this selection so we don't get a harsh transition between the white area and the noisy area. So if we go to Select, Modify, and Feather, and I'm going to feather it by 7 pixels, and that just creates a smoother transition between the pixels that are selected and those that aren't. And now I'm going to hit Control and backspace, or it would be Command and backspace if you're on a Mac. And as you can see, that's filled this with white, and it's got a smooth transition between that area and the noise area. And now I'm going to deselect, and with the noise area on top of everything else, I'm going to hit Control Alt and 2 on the keyboard. That's the number 2 above all the letters, not the number 2 on the number pad. If you're on a Mac, that would be Command Option and 2, and that creates a luminosity based selection. So it's selecting fully the parts that are white, not selecting at all the parts that are black, and partially selecting the parts in between based on how bright they are. I'm going to go down to border layer and add a layer mask. I can hide our noise layer now. In fact, we can get rid of that completely. And as you can see, it's broken up the border a little bit based on the noise pattern in the layer mask. If we want to do the applying the noise to the image itself, again, if we create a new layer, this time we want to fill it with 50% grey. So I'm going to click on the colour picker, got Q as 0, saturation 0, brightness 50%, that will give us middle grey. As that's my foreground colour, I'm going to press Alt and backspace, that would be Option backspace on a Mac to fill it with the colour. I'm going to go up to Filter, Noise, add noise. Want a far smaller amount of noise this time. Now I'm going to apply a small amount of blur to this. Go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, 0.5 pixels, and that will give us our film grain. We can put this on the overlay blend mode, and as you can see, that's added quite a lot of noise to our image, but we can easily adjust the opacity of this layer and reduce the effect to something that's a bit more realistic. And if we just put on our text layer again, and now we've got our image looking a bit more like it was shot on film. So I hope that this tutorial, I know it's been a bit long, but I hope it's been useful for you, showing you how you can create a film border layer based on a scan of a real piece of film, or how you can create your own film border using a path which you can transform quite easily to different sizes and different aspect ratios of images. So you could use it on a square image or a panoramic image or just a normal image, and also how you can add a little bit of noise to the film border to make it a bit more realistic, and add noise to your image as well to make it look more like it was shot on film.